The morning air carried a sharp bite as Lady Margaret Thornfield adjusted her wool coat one final time before stepping out of the black sedan. Christmas Day at Sandringham had always been a sacred tradition in her family, but this year felt different. She had married into the royal household 18 months ago, and every public appearance still felt like walking through a minefield of expectations and unspoken rules. The ancient church bells of St. Mary Magdalene rang out across the Norfolk countryside, their bronze voices echoing through the bare branches of oak trees that had witnessed centuries of royal worship. Margaret could see the crowd gathering beyond the wrought iron gates, their cameras ready to capture every gesture, every expression, every perceived slight or sign of family tension. Her husband, Prince Edward, emerged from the opposite side of the car with practiced ease. At 35, he had been navigating these public moments his entire life, but Margaret noticed the slight tension in his shoulders. The past few months had been challenging for their family. Whispers in the press about financial disagreements, rumors of discord between siblings, and constant speculation about the future of the monarchy had created an atmosphere of unease that even Christmas morning could not fully dispel. The Queen Mother, now 87 and moving with careful dignity, was helped from her vehicle by two discreet security personnel. Despite her age, she carried herself with the bearing of someone who had spent decades in the public eye. Her pale blue coat was perfectly tailored, her pearls catching the weak winter sunlight that filtered through the gray clouds overhead. Margaret watched as other family members began arriving in their designated order of precedence. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge appeared next, their children bundled in miniature versions of adult formal wear. The youngest prince, barely 4 years old, seemed more interested in the frost patterns on the car windows than the solemnity of the occasion. As the family began to form their traditional procession toward the church entrance, Margaret felt the weight of hundreds of eyes upon them. The crowd pressed against the barriers, phones and cameras held high, everyone hoping to capture something newsworthy. She had learned to smile naturally despite the scrutiny, but some days it felt more exhausting than others. The ancient stone church loomed before them, its Norman architecture a reminder of traditions that stretched back nearly 1,000 years. The heavy oak doors stood open, revealing glimpses of the warm interior where local parishioners waited alongside invited guests. Margaret knew that inside, every pew would be carefully arranged according to protocol that had been refined over generations. Prince Edward offered his arm, and together they began the slow walk toward the entrance. Each step felt measured and deliberate, as if they were part of some elaborate choreography designed for public consumption. Margaret had practiced this walk countless times with the royal household staff, learning to maintain the proper pace, the appropriate distance from other family members, and the correct angle for photographs. Behind them, she could hear the rustle of fabric as the Queen Mother followed, her steps steady despite her years. The sound of gravel crunching under carefully polished shoes created a rhythm that seemed to match the distant church bells. Margaret found herself focusing on these small details as a way to manage the overwhelming awareness of being watched and analyzed. The crowd maintained a respectful distance, but Margaret could still hear fragments of conversation carried on the winter wind. Tourists who had traveled from around the world mixed with local residents who had grown up watching royal Christmas services. Some faces looked familiar from previous years, regulars who made this annual pilgrimage to witness tradition in action. As they approached the church steps, Margaret caught sight of the Bishop of Norwich waiting to greet them. His ceremonial robes seemed to glow against the gray stone of the church facade. She knew that once they crossed the threshold, the formal service would begin, and for the next hour, they would be participants in a ritual that connected them to centuries of royal worship. The weight of history felt particularly heavy this Christmas morning. Recent months had brought unexpected challenges to the royal family, and Margaret knew that their public appearance today would be scrutinized for any signs of strain or unity. Every gesture would be analyzed. Every interaction between family members would be interpreted and debated in newspapers and on television programs. She thought about the private conversations that had taken place over breakfast that morning, the careful discussions about seating arrangements, and the order of departure from the church. Nothing was left to chance in royal protocol. Yet somehow there always seemed to be room for the unexpected human moments that made these occasions memorable. The morning service ahead would include traditional carols, readings from Scripture, and a sermon carefully crafted to speak to both the royal family and the broader congregation. Margaret had grown to appreciate these moments of spiritual reflection, even amid the public nature of their worship. There was something grounding about participating in the same rituals that had marked Christmas morning for generations of British monarchs. As they reached the final few steps before the church entrance, Margaret felt a moment of calm descend over her. Despite all the complexity and scrutiny, despite the weight of tradition and expectation, this was ultimately about family gathering to mark one of the most important days in the Christian calendar. The cameras and crowds would fade into the background once they took their seats in the familiar pews where so many royal Christmases have been celebrated before. The interior of St. Mary Magdalene embraced them with warmth and the scent of pine garlands and candle wax. Margaret felt the immediate contrast between the crisp December air outside and the gentle heat radiating from the church's ancient heating system. Stained glass windows cast jeweled light across stone floors that had been worn smooth by centuries of worshippers. The Bishop of Norwich greeted each family member with practiced grace, his voice warm but appropriately formal. Margaret noticed how he seemed to have a personal word for everyone, despite the formal nature of the occasion. When he reached her, his eyes crinkled slightly with genuine warmth as he welcomed her to what had become her second Christmas service at Sandringham. The congregation rose as the royal family made their way to the front pews, the sound of rustling fabric and quiet shuffling filling the sacred space. Margaret was always struck by how the church managed to feel both intimate and grand at the same time. Local families who had worshipped here for generations sat alongside dignitaries and guests from around the world, all united in the shared ritual of Christmas morning worship. Prince Edward guided her to their designated seats, and Margaret settled into the polished wooden pew that had accommodated royal families for decades. The cushions were worn soft by years of use, and she found something comforting in the continuity of it all. To her left, she could see the Queen Mother settling gracefully, her prayer book already open to the morning's selected readings. The children in their family group were remarkably well behaved, though Margaret caught the youngest prince attempting to count the decorative angels carved into the wooden pillars. She remembered being that age and finding church services endlessly long, but there was something magical about Christmas morning that seemed to hold even young attention longer than usual. The organist began the opening voluntary, the ancient instrument's voice filling every corner of the building with rich, complex harmony. Margaret had learned to appreciate the skill required to play such a historic instrument, with its temperamental pipes and mechanical quirks that demanded both technical precision and artistic sensitivity from the performer. As the service officially began, Margaret found herself relaxing into the familiar rhythm of Anglican worship. The responses came naturally now, after months of practice and observation. She had grown up in a different Christian tradition, and adapting to royal religious protocols had been one of many adjustments in her new life, but she had come to find genuine meaning in these ancient words and rituals. The first hymn swelled around them, voices from every corner of the church joining in, "O come, all ye faithful." Margaret was always moved by how the congregation seemed to transform during the singing. Social barriers temporarily dissolved in shared musical expression. The Queen Mother's clear soprano could be heard distinctly, carrying the melody with a strength that belied her years. During the reading from the Gospel of Luke, Margaret found her attention drifting to the faces around her. The local parishioners showed a mixture of reverence for the religious occasion and quiet pride at hosting the royal family in their parish church. Some had been attending Christmas services here since childhood, and she wondered what it meant to them to share this space with members of the royal household. The bishop's sermon was thoughtfully crafted, addressing themes of family, tradition, and renewal without directly referencing the challenges that had faced the monarchy in recent months. Margaret appreciated his skill in speaking both to the specific congregation before him and to the broader audience that would read excerpts of his words in newspapers around the world. Prince Edward reached over to squeeze her hand gently during a particularly moving passage about the importance of supporting one another through difficult times. She knew he was thinking about the private conversations they had shared over recent weeks, the discussions about how to navigate public scrutiny while maintaining their commitment to service and family values. The children's choir from the local school performed a special arrangement of Silent Night that brought tears to several eyes in the congregation. Margaret watched the Queen Mother's face during the performance and saw the mixture of joy and melancholy that often accompanied these moments of beauty amid the weight of royal responsibility. As the service progressed through its familiar patterns of prayer, scripture, and song, Margaret found herself thinking about the meaning of tradition. These rituals connected them not just to their own family history, but to countless generations of believers who had gathered in similar ways to mark the celebration of Christmas. There is something both humbling and empowering about being part of such a long chain of human faith and community. The collection plates passed through the congregation with barely a whisper, though Margaret knew that the amounts contributed would be substantial. Many of the visitors had traveled considerable distances to be present, and their generosity reflected both their appreciation for the experience and their support for the church's ongoing ministry in the local community. During the prayers for the royal family, Margaret felt the strange experience of hearing her own name spoken aloud in petition. It was still surreal to be included in these ancient formulas that had been adapted over the years to include new members of the royal household. She wondered if she would ever become completely accustomed to the formal acknowledgement of her position. The final blessings seemed to arrive both too quickly and not soon enough. Margaret had learned to treasure these moments of spiritual reflection, even as she remained aware of the complex responsibilities that waited beyond the church doors. The bishop's words about carrying the joy of Christmas into the wider world felt particularly relevant as they prepared to return to the public scrutiny that defined so much of their daily lives. As the recessional hymn began, and the royal family prepared to process back down the aisle, Margaret felt a sense of renewal that went beyond the religious significance of the service. Despite all the challenges and complications of royal life, moments like these reminded her why she had chosen to embrace this path and the opportunities it provided to serve others. The transition from the sacred quiet of the church to the bustling energy outside felt almost jarring. As the heavy oak doors swung open, Margaret was immediately aware of the increased crowd that had gathered during the service. What had been a manageable group of onlookers an hour earlier had swelled to several hundred people, all hoping for photographs and perhaps a brief royal acknowledgement. The royal family paused at the top of the church steps, a moment that Margaret had learned was both traditional and strategic. It allowed the gathered photographers to capture the images that would appear in newspapers around the world, while giving the family a brief opportunity to survey the scene before beginning their walkabout among the crowd. Margaret noticed that the Queen Mother seemed particularly energized by the service, her eyes bright with the kind of vitality that public engagement often brought out in her. Despite her advanced years, she had an intuitive understanding of crowd dynamics and an ability to connect with strangers that Margaret continued to study and admire. Prince Edward touched her elbow gently, the signal they had developed to indicate when it was time to begin the next phase of their public appearance. Together, they descended the stone steps, their security detail maintaining an invisible but protective presence around them. Margaret had learned to trust these professionals completely, allowing her to focus on the interpersonal aspects of royal duty rather than worrying about safety considerations. The first group they approached included a family with young children who had clearly been waiting for some time. The parents looked nervous but excited, while the children stared with the kind of unfiltered curiosity that Margaret found refreshing after so much adult formality. The youngest, a girl of perhaps 5, was clutching a small bouquet of flowers that had clearly been picked from a home garden. Margaret knelt down to accept the flowers, genuinely touched by the thoughtful gesture. The little girl whispered something about how pretty Margaret's coat was, and Margaret found herself smiling with real warmth rather than the practiced expression she had mastered for formal photographs. These unscripted moments were often the most meaningful part of public engagements. Behind her, she could hear Prince Edward engaging with a group of veterans who had served in various conflicts around the world. His ability to speak knowledgeably about military service and to show genuine respect for their sacrifices was one of the qualities she most admired about him. Margaret watched as he listened intently to an elderly man describing his service during the Second World War, giving the veteran his complete attention despite the crowd pressing around them. The Queen Mother had drawn her own cluster of admirers, including several elderly women who had clearly been looking forward to this moment for months. Margaret observed how naturally she seemed to navigate these conversations, asking personal questions that showed she was genuinely interested in their lives rather than simply fulfilling an obligation. Her ability to make each person feel individually important was a skill Margaret was still developing. A group of international tourists pressed forward with cameras and phones, speaking in a mixture of languages as they tried to capture the perfect photograph. Margaret had learned to pause naturally when she sensed people were taking pictures, understanding that these images would likely become treasured mementos of their visit to England. The global fascination with the royal family still sometimes surprised her, but she had come to appreciate the joy that these encounters brought to visitors from around the world. As they moved through the crowd, Margaret found herself in conversation with a local woman who had been attending Christmas services at St. Mary Magdalene for over 40 years. The woman shared memories of previous royal visits, describing how the tradition had evolved over the decades while maintaining its essential character. Margaret was struck by how these long-standing community members served as living bridges between past and present, helping to maintain continuity in an ever-changing world. The children in their family group had been surrounded by young people from the local area, and Margaret could see animated conversations taking place about school, sports, and holiday plans. These natural connections between young royals and their contemporaries often provided some of the most genuine moments during public appearances, removed from the formal constraints that governed most adult interactions. A small group of charity workers had positioned themselves near the church gate, hoping to briefly discuss their organizations with family members. Margaret appreciated how Prince Edward managed to acknowledge each group while maintaining the flow of their walkabout. She was still learning to balance genuine engagement with the practical necessity of meeting as many people as possible during their limited time. The weather had remained mercifully clear, though the December cold was beginning to make itself felt through their formal clothing. Margaret noticed that several elderly members of the crowd looked chilled despite their warm coats, and she found herself hoping they would be able to get somewhere warm soon. The dedication people showed in waiting outside for hours just for a brief royal encounter continued to humble her. Near the end of their planned route, they encountered a group of young musicians who had been performing carols for the crowd throughout the morning. Prince Edward paused to compliment their performance, and Margaret watched as their faces lit up with pride at the royal recognition. She was learning that these small gestures of acknowledgement could have lasting impact on people's lives, making them feel that their contributions to community life were valued and appreciated. As they approached their waiting vehicles, Margaret felt the familiar mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion that followed successful public engagements. The genuine warmth of the encounters they had just experienced would stay with her long after the formal photographs appeared in the media. These moments of human connection were what made the challenges of royal life worthwhile. The security team began the subtle process of creating space for their departure, but Margaret noticed that the Queen Mother seemed reluctant to end her conversations with the crowd. Even after decades of public service, she appeared to draw energy from these interactions rather than finding them draining. Margaret hoped that she would develop similar resilience and enthusiasm as she grew into her royal role. The convoy of black vehicles moved smoothly along the country roads leading away from St. Mary Magdalene, but Margaret found herself looking back through the rear window at the crowd that was slowly dispersing. Many people were lingering, sharing photographs on their phones, and reliving the moments they had just experienced. She could see animated conversations taking place as visitors compared their brief interactions with different family members. Inside their vehicle, Prince Edward was reviewing a small notebook where he had jotted down names and details from their conversations. Margaret had learned that he made a point of remembering personal information that people shared during these encounters, often following up with letters or inquiries about situations that had been mentioned. This attention to individual stories was one of the aspects of royal duty that she found most meaningful. The Queen Mother rode in the lead vehicle, and Margaret could see her silhouette through the rear window, sitting with the same perfect posture she maintained in public. Despite her age and the energy she had just expended during the walkabout, she appeared as composed as ever. Margaret wondered if she ever allowed herself moments of physical or emotional exhaustion, or if decades of royal training had made maintaining dignity and strength a completely natural state. Their route back to Sandringham House took them through several small villages where other residents had gathered along the roadside, hoping to catch a glimpse of the returning royal family. Children waved enthusiastically from front gardens while adults stood with respectful attention as the convoy passed. Margaret always found these spontaneous displays of public affection moving, representing a connection between the monarchy and ordinary British life that went beyond formal ceremonies. As they approached the imposing gates of Sandringham Estate, Margaret felt the familiar shift from public duty back to private family life. The contrast between these two aspects of royal existence continued to surprise her, even after 18 months of experience. Within minutes, they would transition from being public figures observed by hundreds to being family members gathering for Christmas dinner in relative privacy. The gravel drive leading to the main house crunched under their tires, the sound somehow both grand and homely at the same time. Margaret could see staff members discreetly positioned near the entrance, ready to assist with coats and to provide any updates on the afternoon schedule. The efficiency of royal household management never ceased to impress her, though she had learned to appreciate the human warmth that existed alongside the formal protocols. Prince Edward helped her from the vehicle, and together they waited for the other family members to gather before entering the house together. This small ritual of collective arrival had become one of Margaret's favorite moments, representing the transition from their public roles back to being simply relatives sharing a holiday meal. The children who had maintained such perfect behavior during the morning's events immediately became more animated as they anticipated the afternoon's family activities. The warmth of Sandringham House enveloped them as they entered the main hall, where a magnificent Christmas tree dominated the space with its traditional decorations and gentle lighting. The contrast between the formal grandeur of the setting and the genuine family atmosphere that prevailed during holiday gatherings continued to fascinate Margaret. Despite the historical significance of their surroundings, these rooms truly came alive when filled with conversation and laughter. Margaret excused herself to freshen up before lunch, grateful for a few moments of solitude in her private quarters. She stood at the window overlooking the estate's parkland, watching deer move gracefully through the winter landscape. These quiet interludes were essential for processing the intensity of public appearances and preparing for the different kind of energy required for extended family gatherings. In her dressing room, she changed from her formal church attire into something more comfortable for the afternoon's activities. The clothing choices for Royal Christmas had been carefully planned weeks in advance, balancing tradition with personal comfort and the practical requirements of various activities. Margaret had learned to appreciate how these details contributed to the overall success of complex family occasions. As she prepared to rejoin the family, Margaret reflected on how much her understanding of royal duty had evolved since her wedding. The morning's church service and walkabout had felt natural in a way that would have been impossible during her early months in the royal household. She was beginning to develop her own style of public engagement while respecting the traditions and expectations that defined royal service. The sound of conversation and laughter from the drawing room indicated that the family was gathering for pre-lunch drinks, a tradition that allowed everyone to decompress from the morning's formality while building anticipation for the afternoon's more relaxed activities. Margaret had come to cherish these transitional moments when they could simply be a family enjoying each other's company. Before heading downstairs, she took a moment to review the afternoon schedule, which included the traditional Christmas lunch, the Queen's broadcast, and various family activities that had been planned to accommodate different ages and interests. The careful orchestration of these events reflected decades of experience in managing large family gatherings while maintaining the traditions that made royal Christmas celebrations unique. Margaret checked her appearance one final time, ensuring that her transition from formal public representative to comfortable family member was complete. She had learned that these role changes were an essential skill in royal life, requiring both emotional flexibility and practical preparation. The ability to be fully present in each context was something she continued to develop and refine. As she made her way toward the family gathering, Margaret felt grateful for the morning's successful public engagement and optimistic about the private family time ahead. The balance between duty and personal life remained challenging, but moments like these reminded her why she had embraced this complex and demanding path. The opportunity to serve the public while being part of a family with such deep traditions and shared commitments made the difficulties worthwhile. The drawing room at Sandringham buzzed with the warm energy of family reunion as Margaret joined the gathered relatives for pre-lunch refreshments. The formal tensions of the morning's public appearance had completely dissolved, replaced by the comfortable intimacy that marked private royal family gatherings. Children who had stood perfectly still during photographs were now animated in their descriptions of the morning's events, while adults shared observations about the crowd and memorable encounters with well-wishers. Margaret accepted a glass of champagne from the discreet staff member who moved seamlessly through the room, ensuring everyone's comfort without intruding on family conversations. She had learned to appreciate these professional touches that allowed the family to focus entirely on each other rather than practical concerns. The efficiency of royal household staff created an atmosphere where spontaneous joy and relaxation could flourish naturally. Prince Edward was engaged in an animated discussion with his younger cousin about the morning's music, both of them clearly having been moved by the children's choir performance. Margaret loved watching these moments when formal family hierarchy gave way to shared interests and genuine enthusiasm. The ability of music to transcend generational differences was something she had observed repeatedly during their public engagements. The Queen Mother had settled into her preferred armchair near the fireplace, but rather than appearing tired after the morning's exertions, she seemed energized by the successful public engagement. Margaret had noticed this pattern before. Rather than draining her, interactions with the public seemed to provide the Queen Mother with renewed vitality and purpose. Several family members had gathered around her chair, eager to hear her reflections on particular conversations she had enjoyed. As lunch was announced, the family moved together toward the dining room, their conversation flowing naturally as they transitioned between rooms. Margaret had learned to love these informal processions through Sandringham's historic corridors, where centuries of royal Christmas celebrations had taken place. The sense of continuity and tradition felt particularly strong during holiday gatherings when the house truly fulfilled its purpose as a family home. The dining room had been set with exquisite attention to detail, crystal and silver catching the light from windows that looked out over the estate's winter landscape. Despite the formal setting, the atmosphere remained relaxed and familial, with conversation topics ranging from morning encounters with parishioners to plans for the afternoon's activities. Margaret appreciated how the family had mastered the art of maintaining dignity while allowing genuine warmth and humor to flourish. During the meal, stories from the morning's walkabout were shared and embellished with good-natured family teasing. The youngest prince provided a detailed account of every dog he had encountered in the crowd, while his older siblings shared their own observations about the international visitors and their various accents and customs. These moments of light-hearted family exchange were precious to Margaret, representing the human side of royal life that was rarely visible to the public. The Queen Mother contributed her own stories from conversations with longtime parishioners, demonstrating her remarkable memory for personal details and her genuine interest in the lives of local residents. Margaret was continually impressed by her ability to maintain meaningful connections with individuals across decades of public service. These skills represented a kind of emotional intelligence that was essential for effective royal duty, but could never be taught through formal training. As the meal progressed through its traditional courses, Margaret found herself thinking about the contrast between this private family gathering and the public perception of royal life. The genuine affection and mutual support among family members was something that rarely translated accurately through media coverage, yet it formed the foundation that made their public service possible. The strength they drew from each other enabled them to meet the demands of their individual roles. The afternoon's activities included the traditional viewing of the Queen's Christmas broadcast, a moment that always felt slightly surreal to Margaret as she watched family members observing their monarch's public message to the Commonwealth. The blend of personal and official relationship that characterized royal family dynamics was perhaps most apparent during these occasions when private and public roles intersected so directly. Following the broadcast, various family groups scattered throughout the house for different activities that had become holiday traditions over the years. Some gathered around the piano for informal carol singing, while others organized games for the children or simply enjoyed quiet conversations in front of fireplaces. Margaret had learned to appreciate how these unstructured hours allowed everyone to engage in whatever way felt most natural and rejuvenating. As late afternoon light began to fade outside the tall windows, Margaret found herself in the library with Prince Edward and several other family members, discussing plans for the evening and the following day's activities. The comfortable rhythm of family life continued to amaze her, particularly the way major public duties could be seamlessly integrated with personal time and individual interests. The day's events had demonstrated once again the delicate balance that defined royal existence. The careful attention to public responsibility combined with the preservation of genuine family bonds and personal well-being. Margaret felt increasingly confident in her ability to navigate these complex dynamics while maintaining her own authentic voice and values within the royal framework. As evening approached, and the family began to prepare for dinner and the day's final activities, Margaret reflected on how much her understanding of royal service had deepened through experiences like the morning's church service and walkabout. Each public engagement taught her something new about connecting with people from all walks of life, while private family time provided the emotional foundation that made such service both possible and meaningful. The success of Christmas Day at Sandringham represented far more than a well-executed public appearance. It demonstrated the ongoing vitality of institutions that connected personal faith, family tradition, and public service in ways that enriched both the royal family and the broader community they served. Margaret felt privileged to be part of this continuing story, contributing her own perspective while honoring the traditions that had sustained the monarchy through generations of change and challenge.